Okay, I'm going to break this drawing down into steps that are way easier to follow than you might imagine, so that you can have a go, create this, and amaze yourself. Okay, so the app that I'm going to be using for this tutorial is PROCREATE. I'm pretty sure that many of the techniques could be used on a different app and different tablet, however. But having said that, within PROCREATE, I'm using the default A4 canvas, which is 297 by 210 millimeters at 300 dpi. I'm also using one of PROCREATE's default color profile codes, which is the sRGB, the one that ends in 2.1, here on the list. In terms of the brushes, with the updated version of PROCREATE, we have two brush options by default. So go back to the libraries. You have the new PROCREATE library and we have the classic library. I'm using the classic library for now. And all the brushes will be here. You don't need to download anything. In terms of the colors, however, I've created a color palette and there is a link down in the description that takes you to my Patreon page where you can download the color file for free. Next to the link are the hexadecimal codes and you can type them in here and piece it together for yourself too. Patreon, however, is the place that you can go and support this channel, as well as gain access to exclusive content such as extended versions of most of these tutorials. A massive thank you to those people who do support me over at Patreon. It makes a huge difference, so thank you so much. And if you want to support the channel perhaps in a different way, well then simply subscribing. It really helps out the channel, so thank you for that. And with all of that said and done, we're going to get started. So we've got our A4 canvas open. We've got layer 1. By default, I'm going to go to the top color on the first row, drag from the color circle in the corner into the canvas and it flood fills. We'll stay on layer 1. I'm going to go to the second color on the top row. I'm going to go with an airbrushing to the soft brush. I'm going to put it pretty big, about 50% size and 100% opacity. And then just under the halfway point, I'm going to do a band of this. Then, adjustments, Gaussian blur, and I'm going to blur that in pretty significantly to about 70%, looks about right, and deselect. We've got a nice gradient now between that rich blue and then a paler kind of blue on the horizon. We'll go to our layers and we'll create a new layer, layer 2. I'm going to use the drawing brushes. I'm going to use the Oberon brush. I'm going to go in initially with the third color on the top row, 10% size, 100% opacity, and we're going to go for just a little bit under the halfway point, and it's going to seem very dark initially, and that's fine. We can just use it as a series of shapes, blobs. We just want to create a kind of rounded, slightly stylized and exaggerated bank of clouds that sweeps across. We're going to have it maybe a little bit more prominent over on this side. We're going to have a tree dominating on this part of the canvas, so really some of the bigger bits of cloud can live and exist over at this side. So just circle in, and then we're going to get a bit of a flattening out at the bottom of that. Perhaps we don't need to draw a line. We can just aim for a flattening out at the bottom. And I've just done all of this with the 10%, and if you press harder, then you get a bigger shape anyway. So just the 1% size actually caters for quite a lot of what we need. And these aren't the best cloud shapes yet, so don't worry. You can see mine don't look particularly realistic. And that's okay. We're going to build them up incrementally. And clouds are quite difficult to capture. And sometimes still, even after loads of examples and creating landscapes, I still struggle sometimes to rein it in and to get the effect that I'm going for. Now I see mine slightly pitched up. I can go to the transform. Freeform doesn't really matter. I'm going to go to the green and just rotate it and then just pitch it down slightly. If yours has done something similar, then you can control it that way. And of course we can erase just as much as we can add. I'm going to perhaps turn this brush size down a little bit, maybe 5%, because it does have a range within even the 10%, but sometimes just turning it down allows you to really fine tune those smaller areas, and you can still get a big shape even with the 5%. We're just fine tuning it a little bit, and you can go along and fine tune even a background element like clouds at any point. Even though we move forwards and we do other things, doesn't mean that we have to avoid returning to the clouds. You can Go back and refine these later if need be. You can see I've created a kind of narrowing set of shapes. First of all, I'm going to go to the adjustments, the Gaussian blur. And it's quite a sharp edged kind of brush, so I'm going to slide that Gaussian blur across just into the 4% and deselect, and that's softened it to begin with. Then go to the layer, tap on the alpha lock. A little checkerboard appears, which means that when we add a different color, let's go for the white, which is the 5th color, you'll see it's only possible to add it inside that shape now. I'm not quite ready for the white, so we'll go for the 4th color on the top row. We'll go in still with the Oberon brush, maybe upwards to 7% size, but we don't want it as strong, maybe about 30% opacity. And now we can just sort of build in some extra shapes, and I don't care about the overlapping of this color. It's not going to look good straight away, and that's not a problem. We're just creating a series of extra colors and tones, and primarily along the edge. The sun is going to be coming in from this direction, therefore that side is going to be illuminated in a different way and much brighter. We've got the white color to add next as well, but just as a general, on this side of any of the shapes, on the right side of a cluster is definitely going to have more of the lights, for example. In fact, I'm going to put that up 20% size, and we can just go over that side. We're not going to have any of the dark colors when it comes over here. We can just allow some of it to remain over this edge a little bit more. And you can see it's pretty untidy, but that's not a problem. Again, we can go to the adjustments, the Gaussian blur, slide it across this time, maybe 8%, and deselect. And it's softened that in to a large extent. I might create a new layer, tap on it and put on the clipping mask this time, which links it to the layer we've just created. But it is a separate layer in case it goes wrong. So let's go now to the 5th color. We'll remain with the Oberon brush. We're going to turn it down this time, 5% size and 30% opacity. And let's just zoom in a little bit. And I'm going to focus on the edges. I'm going to identify those to begin with. Almost just like an outline, really. Because even if you're not sure where to put the highlights for the whole image, we definitely want it on that leading edge that is hit by the sun from that side. That much we can be sure of. And then back from that edge, there's going to be other tufts of cloud, other round shapes that perhaps just the leading edge is caught. So you can create more curves. And you wouldn't do them that way. It doesn't make any sense. But you can do them that way, and it kind of fits in with that concept. So as well as at the edge, you might have a section here, for example, and you can just highlight the edge of a round shape there, and maybe another one here next to it. Maybe another one up here. And you have kind of a layered effect then. There could be all sorts of layers of shapes within our cloud structure. And that's the kind of effect that we're going for. Again, it's pretty stylized, so we don't need to overly obsess about it being hugely realistic. There are times, and there are some of my tutorials that are much more towards the photographic end kind of aesthetic, but this is more stylized, a bit more exaggerated. The colors are really going to be vibrant, a bit extreme. And I really like doing a variety of different aesthetics, and in this case it's pushing it quite far. So let's turn that up again a little bit, maybe 10%, and turn it down even further, maybe 15% opacity. And there's nothing wrong with sweeping over whole sections, lightening up. There might be a whole back part there that we want to just push a little bit further back, so we can just sweep over that. And again, it creates that sense of different layers, so there'll be some bits that project further forwards because you've got darker tones, and other whole sections of the cloud that now retreat back a little bit more, and look a bit more realistic in that sense. Let's turn it back down again, 5%, zoom out, keep checking. Some areas over here perhaps that need a little bit more make a bit more of the highlight. And I wouldn't spend too long on these necessarily. I wouldn't, cause yourself anxiety over it. Like I say, sometimes clouds can be a little bit tricky. And sometimes you just need to take a step back before you can actually see that maybe they are working better than you think, especially when you put it in context with everything else. So if this is an element that you struggle to just kind of visualize and get the look of the clouds right and how you like them, and maybe just give it an initial kind of attempt. Even if you're not 100% satisfied with it, keep going, push through to the other elements of the tutorial, see how it looks in context, and if need be, you can go back and just fine-tune them a little later. Okay, I'm going to turn that down 3% size and maybe 60% strength. Opacity, I say strength, it's labeled opacity, but it makes sense to think of it in terms of strength. And then we can just really whack in some bold white sections. I might even go a bit smaller with that. 2%, really just some exaggerated white sections now. And what we'll do next is we'll probably use the smudge tool just to blend in, soften in some of these if they're not quite working how we want. I think that is slightly small overall. I think the 3%. You can always go in and put the smaller percentages when you really are happy, other than one or two little refinements you want to make. I don't feel like what I'm creating is quite there yet, and I don't want to spend an excessive amount of time on the first element either. So just a few more little shapes before we move along. And honestly, it's this kind of texture I really quite enjoy. I realise it's not going to be everyone's area, and clouds can be frustrating, so don't worry too much. I'm just filling in a little area there. It looks a bit scribbly. Now I'll zoom in. I'm getting a whole section there. I'm just sweeping over it, shading it in. You can see now it creates a different kind of quality, a bit more of a dramatic kind of structure that I quite like. I'm going to turn the opacity down again to 20%, and then they can just be maybe the slightly bigger size again, 5%. Just some extra little features that sweep along. There's longer shapes that go with the cloud as well. Let's put that even bigger, 10%. Now, if you hear any strange little noises and metallic clanging sounds during the video, I have an oil heater. It's actually quite cold here in the UK now, and my studio is not heated centrally, so I have a little oil heater, and it does make quite a lot of noise, so I apologize if you hear it throughout the tutorial. I'm afraid it's necessary in order to stay warm and comfortable while I'm creating these. So anyway, I'm going to now perhaps go to the adjustments, the Gaussian blur, and blur that in to, well, 5 is a little bit much, maybe about 4%, and you can see that's done a great deal to soften that in and create a more pleasing effect, I think. And if you're not entirely happy with it, like I was saying before, first of all, I'm going to take layer 3, tap on it and merge down. Now they're both on one layer. Therefore, I can turn off the alpha lock now. I can go in with the smudge. I'm going to put the smudge to the airbrushing soft brush, maybe about 4% size, 60% strength, and I can just soften in elements of this, especially along the bottom. It kind of works. Some of these elements I just want to soften in, perhaps. Maybe soften it in as it comes over here. It's also a good way of kind of pushing and stretching out features. It looks a bit wonky there. Turn it on its side. Perhaps you can level that up. Looks a bit better. I'll create another layer above it, layer 3. We'll go in with maybe the second color on the top row. Still the Oberon brush, 5% size, 20% strength. And, well, I'm just going to create some extra little bits of clouds, some streaks. And they're just little kind of tufts that just streak through the sky. Not enough to form nice round shapes, but they're just little wispy areas. I don't want them as lines as such, but just keep them a little bit random. And then I'm going to go to the adjustments, the motion blur, and I'm actually going to drag it down diagonally just a little bit, not too much. I don't want it to look like they're actually moving fast, so maybe about 15%. It just stops them looking too stagnant. We'll stay on the same layer. I'm going to go with the white, the 5th colour. Same brush still, 5% size. This time about 40% opacity, and I'd like to extend some extra little tufts, bits of cloud as it comes over this direction, and we can just extend that a little bit. It's going to be behind distant mountains and the tree, but just some little bits in the sky is worth adding. Okay, that'll do for the sky for now. I'm going to go to my layers and create a new layer, layer 4. I'm going to go to the 6th colour on the top row. I'm going to go to the airbrushing medium brush, maybe about 3% size. Let's do 90% opacity. And then from over here, I'm just going to create a kind of undulating line. And it really is probably only this middle section we're actually going to see of this distant range, but we'll get it in there anyway. Drag into the lower section and it fills. There is a little gap, but we can just go and fill that. It takes a moment. And like I say, it's really only this section we're going to see. I think it's perhaps a little bit closer to the cloud. I can go to the transform, uniform, drag it down, create a little bit more of a gap, not much, maybe about there. I'll come back to it. We'll keep moving forward. We'll go to our layers and create a new layer, layer 5. Got this colour we're going to ignore for now. We're going to go to the 8th colour. Same brush, still 3% size, still 90% opacity. And well, I'm going to have it up higher over at this side, sweeping in, and then rising up again a little bit. Something like this. Again, drag into it. There's a little gap we just need to fill in, so let's go and do that. You can see it just dips enough for us to see this distant area, and there's quite a decent area there that we can play with too. Don't care about this bit, we're going to cover that up. So let's go back to layer 4. Let's play around with that. I'm going to first of all tap on it and put on the alpha lock. Again, that limits us with inside the shape, it won't spill out anywhere else. I am going to go in with the 7th colour on the top row. I'm going to go with the soft brush with an airbrushing, 2% size, 30% strength, and zoom in. And again, the light is coming from this side, so we're going to preference this kind of warmer colour. It's got a yellowy green tinge to it on this side of perceived kind of mountains in the distance. It's hard to be exact, but you can imagine like a top edge here, and as it slopes down this way. So we're not going to do any lines that come that way, basically. We're going to preference lines that come this way on the right side of any shapes to describe those distant mountains or hills. Maybe turn it down a little bit more, lower on that 2%, 20% strength. And again, we can just do it as sweeps of lines. Helps describe some of the features in the distance. And yours don't have to be, again, exactly the same as mine. Using the same colours, the same kind of techniques, you're going to get a similar look, and that's what really matters. I'm going to put the opacity up 50% and zoom in, and we're still using the soft brush, bottom end of the 2%, and then just at the kind of imagined lower area of those distant mountains, maybe in about the middle of this overall shape, we can imagine kind of fields, flat areas, so we get this kind of golden yellow that's in the distance, and when you really look at the colour, it's really not that yellower colour at all. In fact, it's a green, and it's a greyed out green, but it looks yellow in this area. Now, just be aware that the colours that you see appearing on your iPad probably look different than the way it appears when I'm painting it. My camera distorts the colours, and different screens are calibrated differently too. So if you're watching on a desktop, for example, your monitor is probably set differently than an iPad screen, and there's all those variations that throw it off. But as long as you've got the colour palette and you're following the instructions and putting the right colour in at the right point, you'll end up with something by the end of the tutorial that looks right. And perhaps compare your finished version to the still image that I show at the end and compare the colours on those two, and you'll find that actually the colours will look right. Okay, I'm going to do another flat area here. I'm going to go over it even more. I'm going to sweep it this way. I'm going to have it not connected. I'm going to go over it more though, so it becomes even more yellow. Go over it more times. Okay, so it's just a suggestion of detail in the background there. I don't need to do too much. I'm going to go up to layer 5. Again, tapping it and put on the alpha lock. I'm going to go to a darker blue. I'm going to go to the first color on the middle row, and I'm going to go in with the soft brush with an airbrushing. 10% size, 50% strength will do. And I'm just going to bring in some darker tones over here. Maybe just a hint over here, but press lightly, not as much. And then it's going to stay lighter in the middle. And then I'm also going to go to the adjustments, the Gaussian blur, blend that across to about the 50% and deselect. I'm going to go in with the 8th color on the top row, still the soft brush, 2% size, 30% strength, zoom in. And then, because we've now got that dark color, let's turn it down even further actually, lower on that 2%. Because we've got that dark color, we can then add some little bits that kind of articulate, just give a bit more texture. Sweep through the darker color, and we can add texture there without really having to do very much on the color palette. Just some sweeps through. Again, it kind of follows the shapes. Again, we've got different colors. Let's go to the second color on the middle row. 2% size, 30% strength. And it's got a kind of more of a green. And this set of mountain in this area is intended to look closer to us. So it makes sense if it's got some warmer, more obvious greens really. Bring them through. Again, back to the first color. And we did add a sweep of that color in, but we can bring even more of that. Might be a whole section here, for example. We can just have that projected forward. Much like we had different layers and levels within the cloud, I suppose it's quite similar here. Different things project further and closer to us, or further away, depending on how dark they are. Again, we don't need to spend too long on that necessarily. I'm going to go to the third color on the middle row. Lower on that 2%. It's still at 30%. In fact, I'm going to turn it down more, really low on that 2% size. We can just use this to, again, bring in some highlights along the top. Just bring that at the top edge, just some sweeps down. And it's almost like everything wants to arrive here. So we sweep it down, it's heading towards this point. Again, we can perhaps add this color over here, although it looks darker over there, so we won't bother. We'll go back to the 10th color on the top row. Maybe some of those yellow colors we can add subtly up here. I don't want to do too much of that, just a little bit. Perhaps just bring some of that together a little bit. And then over at this side, perhaps the 9th color on the top row, we can use that again. It has a warmer, and it's certainly subtle, but it has a subtly warmer hue to it. We can just maybe tap in a few textures. Think about where the sun is coming from. Don't need to overdo it particularly. I'm going to go to my layers, create a new layer, layer 6, go to the colors. I'm going to use the 4th color on the middle row. I'm going to go in with the medium brush with an airbrushing, 5% size, and again 90% opacity. I want just a little bit of a kind of field that's closer. I want it to sort of swell up and almost meet that, but not quite. And it can sort of subside, disappear over this side. Have it in here. I'll join it up at either side just for simplicity's sake. And then we can just fill it in. It doesn't need to be because it's going to be obscured anyway, but we'll do that. Tap on it, put on the alpha lock. Move along to the 5th color on the middle row. Stay with the same brush, but we'll put it down to 2% size and maybe 20% opacity. Remember, the sun is coming from over here. So maybe just on this edge of that curve, not limited to that, but more of it on that side perhaps, we get some of this sun. We'll just do some patchy streaks through there just to break up that texture a little bit. Again, doesn't need to be spent too long on necessarily. Adjustments, Gaussian blur, blur it in, maybe 5% and deselect. Go to our layers, create a new layer, layer 7. Move along to the 6th color. Still with a medium brush, let's put it back up again, 5% size, 90% strength. And well, we're going to have it meet where we kind of ended there. We'll bring it down and just sort of sweeps down. Maybe that's not enough. Bring it down to about the middle point, and then we'll just fill it in. Sometimes I prefer to put it at 90% because then when you do have to go over it like this, you're kind of adding in texture without even intending it. And sometimes that texture can really help and just make the overall thing just more interesting and more dynamic. I'm then going to fold it in from this side, so take it high up there, bring it down, and I'm going to imagine a line that sweeps over here, probably as a more prominent line, but we'll get to that. And just fill it in. Do it more manually this time. That looks fine. So we only see a little bit of that kind of more distant fill. It's not as distant as those, but it's not as close as these either. I'm going to tap on it and put on the alpha lock. Move along, 7th color on the middle row. Might just switch back to the soft brush with an airbrushing. 3% size, 20% opacity. And again, I'm going to have this, as I was explaining, to be the more prominent part of that landscape, the fields. We'll bring a sweeping line across there. Maybe it could swell up a little bit on this side. Bring it through a few times. Doesn't need a great deal of texture. In fact, some of those gaps really do a lot. That's all we need. At the top edge, maybe just a bit more. And then we've got a whole section there. Turn it down 2% and change direction just a little bit, coming in from this angle, and sets a kind of a different quality to that area. And we can perhaps just have a bit more of it concentrated here. It's going to blend into that other one initially, but we've got a way of separating it in a moment. So I'm going to create a new layer, layer 8. I'm going to go in still with a soft brush with an airbrushing. I'm going to move along to the 9th color on the middle row, 2% size, 30% strength, and I'm just going to build up some distant trees. And actually what I might do is drag that underneath layer 7. Therefore, I can't add it here, but I can do it right on the very edge, and it just sort of sticks up there a little bit. Just enables me to be a little bit more rough. Don't need to be quite so careful. And we can just sort of pepper them along that top edge, move them along, and bring them down here. We don't need to articulate the trees particularly at all. Just a series of blobs, and they're probably too vibrant, the orange at this moment. But again, that's easy to fix. We'll just get the orange in there to begin with. I've got a little anomaly there. I'm going to annoy me. Let's get rid of it. Where was it? It's on layer 5. Go on there. Just erase it. Back to layer 8. I don't want the eraser. I want the brush again. And with layer 8, I'm also going to use the alpha lock. I'm going to go in with this nice purple colour on the bottom row, the 8th colour, 2% size, so still soft brush. Like I say, 2% size, I've gone down to about 15% opacity. And then just the bottom edge of some of these trees. Imagine the under part of the tree, underside of the tree has got a bit of shadow. And I'm just going to, perhaps with some of them, like this whole section, just knock it back a little bit. It darkens it up, but it makes it more muted as well. I think they look better for it. Could even try this more of a grey, blue, 9th colour. Subdue them a little bit. We can always go and pepper some more orange in there if need be. Sweep that across. I think that does a good job at kind of knocking them back a little bit. I prefer that. Go and turn off the alpha lock again. I also go in with this orange, which is the 6th colour. Turn the soft brush down, low on the 2% size, 30% strength. And then if I want to add any just sharper little details, highlights, then I can do that. I do want them to look like they're actually reflecting back a bright sun. And the fields are so yellow that if they don't have some of that bright colour in there, they're going to look a little bit strange. Again, let's put back on the alpha lock actually. Otherwise we're going to end up with some rogue kind of blobs and shapes that just don't make that much sense. Again, they're not articulated, they're not detailed, they don't need to be particularly. I'm going to go up to layer 7. I'm going to go in with this purple colour, the 8th colour, fill the soft brush, lower that 2% size, 30% strength, and well, I'm going to have like almost a continuation, bushes, features that just kind of run along here and just help us understand this sweep. Maybe a little bit higher on the brush, not 2%, still 2%, but just a little bit bigger. There's always a range within each percentage, so sometimes I'll say low on the 2%, sometimes I'll say high. It can make quite a big difference sometimes. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take layer 7, tap on it and merge down with layer 8. I'm going to tap on layer 8 and merge down with layer 6. So now we have them condensed on one layer. Not too unwieldy, we've got a bit more focus then. Okay, so I'm going to create a new layer on top, layer 7. I'm going to go in with the first colour on the bottom row. I'm going to go to the inking studio pen, which is a very sharp brush, but we'll just blur it in slightly so it matches what we've already got. We're going to put it up 100% size and 100% opacity, and then we're just going to set the base of the tree somewhere around here, and then it's pressure sensitive, so if we press harder we get a thicker line, if we press more lightly then it goes thinner. And as we come up here we're going to have a branch structure and then just gradually release the pressure if it kind of meandering off. We don't need to do too many branches necessarily, but we're certainly going to have enough, and some of these branches we're going to obscure anyway, so you don't need to worry too much. But we definitely need to get some in there, and branches always trail off and get thinner as they go. As long as you bear that in mind, then the branches can twist and turn and do pretty much whatever you want. Again, make sure it's thickest as it meets the tree trunk. And then we can have more branch structures that go up here and release the pressure. You need to come back down and just to fine tune. Little anomalies like that, if it goes a little bit wrong, don't worry. We've always got the really convenient way of fixing that is just to cover it all with more foliage. So don't worry too much. Again, just some twisting and turning. Some branches that come off. We can always go in and add more branches. If we know that an area is going to be more visible, it needs more branches because it's really quite prominent, and we can go in and do that, but initially let's just add a sufficient amount. You can cross over. And if once you've got the main ones in, you want to turn it down maybe to about 40% size, and then you can just add some more branches. Again, this is another example where your branches, your tree doesn't need to look exactly the same as mine at all. Use what I'm doing as a guide and then do your own version. Especially with organic elements, they're not going to be perfection. They can take on a kind of character and quality of their own, and I think that is for the better. I quite like that. And I could draw 20 different trees and not a single one of them would be the same as any other. Okay, so that will do initially. I've got enough branches there to work with. I'm going to go to my layers, create a new layer, layer 8, and I'm going to drag it underneath layer 7. And on this layer, I'm going to go in with the artistic Taralea brush. I'm going to tap on it. I'm going to go to the stroke path. And spacing is at 15 by default, but we're going to put it up to about 50%. And you can see it's just separated the little particles of the brush. I'm going to put the brush size about 2%, and about 70% opacity, and we're going to go in with this bright orange, the 9th colour on the middle row. And this is behind the branches. I'm going to start off with the tips of each branch. have done, and there's been lots of branches we haven't done yet and that aren't visible, and that's fine, but the ones we have, bring them in. And then let's take this branch, for example. We're going to imagine there's another branch we don't see, but we're doing the same thing too. So we're bringing it in, almost like we're drawing the branches with the foliage brush. And that way it just kind of applies the texture in an appropriate way. Let's bring it in, and it's random enough not to look too forced. We'll keep working around the tree. We've got a lot to do. For the middle section, it's going to be pretty much filled in. So the point of this is mainly for the edges, but it's useful to do. And then let's put it over 5%. And like I say, in the center, we're going to have it pretty much filled in. There's not going to be much in the way of gaps on this tree. Let's just really go for it. Fill it in. And this brush kind of changes hue slightly as well, which is quite pleasing, quite nice. Has a little bit of variation between the different types of oranges. And if we want to, we could always just go in with airbrushing soft brush, 5%, 6%, doesn't really matter. Size, 60% strength. Just fill it in, turn down 2%, and just be conscious of the textures we've already created. We don't want to destroy them. I'm also going to use the rainforest brush with an organic, 2% size, 90% strength. And it's a really good brush for filling in texture quite quickly. Maybe in these areas here, we can just apply texture. I do want gaps there in the lower areas. Maybe when it kind of just sweeps and gathers and clumps together, this is a good brush for that. I want perhaps a really big branch sweeping area of the tree over here. I'm showing you various different techniques just within the one tree. You can swap and change, and this brush is quite a good one to do the same technique where we're applying sort of branches with the foliage to create that kind of effect too. The other one is more spaced apart and it's probably only really useful for the absolute edge, whereas this brush is quite good for the bulk of that texture. Let's really block it in with this brush. Again, just left and right, brings it together. We're probably obscuring quite a lot of the initial texture we did, and that's fine. You build it up, whatever you do initially, you can't be precious about. If you find the way that you're applying next with a different brush is just working better, then that's fine too. Allow it to be creatively destructive. Destroy what you've done already in order to create something better, and that's fine. So all part of the process. I think I'm quite happy with that kind of texture better. I'm going to go to the 8th color. I'm going to perhaps use a lower percentage opacities, maybe 40%. And we're still using the rainforest brush with an organic. And now within these shapes, in fact, it might be useful to go to the layer, put on the alpha lock. That way we don't need to be too tidy. We can just continue to sweep some of that texture through. We've got layers, we've got depth. And we've used the 9th colour. Again, we're on the 8th colour, so we're getting a variety of different oranges. Just really block it in. We're going to obscure it with other layers too, so don't be too precious. We're going to go to our layers. We'll go to the top and create a layer on top of that, layer 9, above the branches this time. We go to the 9th colour on the middle row again, and this time it's going to, with the rainforest brush, we'll go stronger, 90% again, 2% size, and this time it's going to cut in front of many of the branches we've already created. Again, this is another kind of destructive part of the process where we obscure things we've just created. But you need to do it, it's part of the process. It's what is going to make the tree look nice. Being able to layer up, do things behind the branches and then in front of, it's an area of digital art that is really useful. Layers are just so useful. I've been in quite a bit of traditional acrylic painting of late, trying to get back into some of that, as well as my digital work. And yeah, I found The lack of layers when you're doing traditional painting is a real disadvantage, and you miss it. And it's such an important part of working digitally, I feel. To make full use of it, we're layering up, putting features in front of the layer with the branches and behind it as well. And we'll create this real depth of texture. And then we're going to try the yellow. In fact, no, before that, we'll go to the 6th color on the middle row. And again, it's just about layering. So we'll build in some of this color first, and we'll just tap in, especially at this corner. The light is coming from up there. So maybe just as it curves round, slightly off the canvas, it's just collecting that light a little bit more. So we'll pepper in some of this texture, and then obviously we've got this yellow, the 7th color, which is really intense. So you just want to go a little bit careful with that color. You definitely want to use it to really bring out that vibrancy, but we want to use it a bit more carefully perhaps. So we'll go back to the 6th color and we'll bring some of that in first. Again, allow it to cover up many of the branches. It's absolutely fine. Doesn't matter. It's going to look better for it. Back to the yellow, 7th color. And we've also got, a bit like we had highlights on the edge of cloud kind of formations and sections, we've kind of got little clusters of foliage, and again, it's almost forming like an edge, so we can go around that edge as well. Not quite as distinctly as cloud, but a little bit like that. Just a little smattering of some of that yellow throughout, especially higher up. And in fact, I'm going to go to the airbrushing soft brush, 10% size, maybe about 15% opacity or something like that, and just a bit more of that glow up in the corner, spreads it out. What I might do is go back to layer 8, tap on it and turn off the alpha lock. And because it's slightly more distant, I want it to be a bit more blurred. So I'm going to go to the adjustments, the Gaussian blur. This texture then, we slide it in, slide it across, just into about the 3%, and it softens it slightly. And then I'm also going to go to the adjustments, the hue, saturation and brightness. And I think I want to turn that saturation up a little bit. So 50%, I don't want to do too much. Maybe about 53, it just brings out some of those oranges a bit more vibrantly. Let's go to the tree layer, layer 7. Again, I said I was going to blur it in. It's a bit sharp. It looks a bit too contrasty. So I'm going to go to the adjustments, the Gaussian blur, and I'm going to blur it in. Not too much, maybe about the 2%, and deselect. I'm going to go and put on the alpha lock on layer 7. I'm going to come down to this color, the 2nd color on the bottom row. I'm going to go in perhaps with a medium brush with an airbrushing, 2% size, maybe 60% strength. Sun is coming in from here. And we can just do some streaks of texture that run up the tree trunk. It doesn't have to be a huge amount of time on this really, but just a few suggestions of texture will go a long way. It doesn't look quite so flat. And then maybe the 10th color on the bottom row. Just turn it down a little bit more. 1%. Turn it down 30% strength. We can just add a few little bits in there. The sun's coming through. Just be mindful not to add too much. Just a bit of sun's catching there perhaps. The sun is really quite strong in this. It is a huge factor of what's making the image work. You can see that's added a bit of life to that tree. Turn it down 4%, 5%. Just use this to build in a bit more texture on this side, right at the edge, not a lot. Gives it that round effect. Okay, we're going to start working at the base of the tree. So I'm going to go to the top and create a new layer, layer 10 at the very top. And on this new layer, I'm going to go to the rainforest brush with an organic. Again, third color, 2% size, maybe 80% strength. And I'm just going to build in this texture as a kind of shadow created by the tree. So we sweep it up and we'll do the dark color first. It's probably a bit too dark, but we can lighten it up and join it up with the tree like that. Build in some sections here, shadow. Let's just blot it out initially. You can always go back in, other colors. Let's just do that kind of sweep. Put it up, 5%, fill it in. Gives us a nice dark area to begin with, then we'll move along. Fourth color, turn it down, 3%. And then maybe in the foreground, just a nice, more vibrant green. Then we'll move along, fifth color. And then for the most part, here, we're going to have this slightly lighter green, really. Not quite as fierce, not quite as intense. And we'll just sweep some of this in. I don't mind if it has some little gaps, tufts, where the darker green remains, that's fine too. But this is the green that's going to actually be the most prominent in the shadow. The little dark areas are going to be a little more rare. And then we've also got this really vibrant green, which is not quite as yellow. It's definitely more towards the green. So that we have the shadow. We also have some green, perhaps turn it down, 2%. And then pouring in from this side, the other side of the tree is also some of this sun hitting grass. We don't want to lose the sunlight in the foreground completely. So a few tufts of this. Bring it to life a little bit more in the foreground like that. Turn it down, 30% opacity or so. A bit here. Starting to bring it together quite nicely. Then within this layer, I'm going to go to the smudge, inking, drying brush, about 10% size, 50% strength, and then just some of these areas. Fat's a bit stronger on the strength. Let's put it to 100, and we can push up some of these areas, create suggestions of grass texture a little bit, layer it through. So some of the dark colours get pushed through the light, and sometimes the light gets pushed through the dark, and that kind of combination can be really quite effective without a huge amount of labour put into it. Just remember to keep swapping directions. Blades of grass don't grow uniformly, and we're going to focus this mainly in the foreground. It is mainly a sharper detail for the very close little sections. We're going to go and create a new layer, layer 11 on top. I'm going to go along to the 9th colour. I'm going to go in with the airbrushing medium brush, 2% size, maybe about 80% strength. Again, it's the 9th colour on the bottom row. And in the shadow, I'm just going to do some stones. Just kind of littering this whole area. Keep them kind of random, a variety of sizes peppered through. Maybe we can have some bigger ones here. So flat on the bottom, and then more rounded collection of stones. This is the kind of base, kind of neutral colour, and then we've got other colours that we can use to really bring them to life when they hit into the sunnier areas too. So we've got a smattering there. Let's build in a couple. And then some smaller ones that are in the direct sun, but we've not added the highlights yet. Nice big close one here. Look good. And here. Let's go in with the 10th colour. Turn it down 1%. And then we can just, and it's still at 80%, it's probably a bit strong, maybe 40%. Maybe we could just, a subtle suggestion of highlights, even within the shadow ones, not too much though. And then maybe this one is in the sun, and it's going to reflect some really bright colours. Let's go for the second colour on the top row, and it's quite intense, but it's in the sun, so why not? And then maybe just one side of it, we're going to just tap in to create textures in the sun. 10th colour on the bottom row, we can mix in with that so we get a slightly earthier colour. So it's not completely kind of sky blue. Combination works. Again, let's move along. Let's go for the second colour on the top row. Nice little stone there. Sun impacting. And again, subdue it slightly with the 10th colour on the bottom row. Slightly earthier colour. Bring out that nice sun effect on all of the stones in the sunnier parts. I'm going to try the third colour on the top row. Again, some more of those blues, maybe even a darker blue. It seems really intense, but we'll go for the first colour on the middle row, just as a kind of sweep on the shadow part of the stones. I quite like that. It is quite strong, but if you graze, we've only got it at 40%, just graze across it, and that's quite nice actually. And then we've got the 7th colour on the bottom row, and probably the bottom part of some of these stones, especially the big ones that are more prominent in the shadow area. Need to add some darker blue, perhaps, just to give it more shadow, more volume, and that works. Maybe sometimes the transition between the light and the dark, sometimes you get a little bit of that really dark colour just following that edge. That can work. What I might do is create a new layer, layer 12, and I'm going to use the purple, the 8th colour, and I'm going to use the soft brush with an airbrushing, 2% size, 40% strength or so, and I think I want to create just a semblance of a little bit of a path cutting through, and it can again be a little bit destructive of some of the things we've got. So just meandering through there a little bit. Don't care if it destroys a little bit. So we've just got that general shape in there to begin with. Then 10th colour, 2% size, 40, it's 39, but it's 40 enough. And then, yeah, just build in some light on the left side. Perhaps I'll turn it down a bit more, low on that 2%. Create some streaks that come this way. And you can see it's almost like the grass and any detail here has a bit of height and then creates the shadow that's here. That's kind of the effect that we're going for. And then just subtly build in some texture back there. Perhaps I'll use a different colour for that so it hasn't got warmth. Really, to sell that illusion we need a bit of shadow, so let's go for the first colour on the bottom row, 2% size, maybe only 20% strength. And then just in this bit where it joins the little grass area, we need just a bit more darkness. So just tap it in. I don't intend to really get bogged down in absolute detail. You are welcome to do so, obviously. And then back here, just a few taps of texture. Just kind of binds it together a little bit more successfully then. We're getting close to a finished result. what I would say maybe is we go in with the 9th colour, 1% size, 90% strength. We can use that just to create some more little stones in our path. Litter them round. Go for the 10th colour, light colour, again. Work in some of that sunlight into areas that feel like they need it. Again, some of the blues, 2nd colour. Push it a little bit further. You're going to have to just judge what you feel should be in the sunlight, what shouldn't. Maybe some stones back here a little bit in the distance where you just see the lighter colours more than anything. I think I'd have some little bushes there. So I might go to layer 10 for this, why not? We'll go in for the 10th colour. Let's go for the organic rainforest brush, 2% size, 80% strength. We'll just create some little bushes that are just in this region. And I suppose they should have a bit of sunlight as well, especially this side. And they're on layer 10, so I can isolate them easily enough. Bush shape. So tap on layer 10, alpha lock. Let's go in with the orange, the 9th colour on the middle row. Tap in some orange just to soften the impact of those a little bit. Turn off the alpha lock. I think perhaps I'll go in with the 10th colour. There might just be little random sections of orange that just cut through here. There could be little beginnings of bushes. I don't want to do too many of them. Just a few, and then again with the orange, the 9th colour. Whoops. Just where the highlights. A few there, not much. And arguably, that kind of brings it together a little bit more. Some of those oranges back there, a bit more texture. Let's go to the 3rd colour on the bottom row, and yeah, just a little bit of that dark green coming through underside of stones. Makes sense. They create kind of shadows of their own. A bit strange if they don't. Base of the tree, just a bit more of that green. Blend it through. I'm going to go to the 6th colour. Stay with the rainforest brush, 2% size, 30% strength. We've got it on a layer that's above other things, so it's fine. I'm just going to bring in just a little bit of texture through there. Sweep through the grass in the background. A bit flat looking. Not much. One last detail, I think I just want to go to layer 9 slide and duplicate it. On the top version, I'm going to tap on the N, scroll down to the add blend mode, and that's too much, but tap again on the A, turn it to none. That's where we are, and I think I'm just going to turn it up maybe to about 15%, and I quite like the way it brings in just that bit more sun, a bit more highlight. Okay, I think I'm going to leave this here at this point. I hope you've enjoyed following along. Don't forget to hit subscribe if you haven't done already, and I shall see you back here soon. Bye for now.